In a small, quiet town where whispers often carried more weight than actions, the local police department had always been a place of rigid tradition. Officers followed the same routines, upheld the same policies, and resisted change. For years, it had been a predominantly white force, with little diversity beyond the occasional officer who came and went. However, things were changing. The new mayor, elected with a promise to bring fresh perspectives and equality to all facets of the town, had begun making moves to modernize the local government, including the police department. As part of this change, a new police chief had been appointed, and the name on the announcement caught everyone by surprise. The new chief wasn't just a man of color, he was a man who had once been the community's most vocal critic of the very institution he was now set to lead. A former activist who had spent years pushing for police reform, Officer Michael Davis had worked his way up the ranks, determined to bridge the divide between law enforcement and the community. His appointment was controversial, sparking heated debates in the town. Some hailed it as a step toward true change, others saw it as an affront to the status quo. Among the skeptical was Officer Daniel Hughes, a 15-year veteran of the force. Hughes was known for his old-school mentality, holding on to the traditional views of law enforcement with stubborn pride. He had grown up in the town, knew everyone's business, and believed in the hierarchy that had kept things orderly for so long. A change like this was unsettling. The idea of a black man, someone who had criticized the police so fiercely, stepping into the highest position of power was something Hughes couldn't stomach. One morning, as the officers gathered in the parking lot for a routine briefing, Officer Davis, now Chief Davis, arrived early, walking confidently across the lot toward the department's entrance. His stride was purposeful, but his arrival didn't go unnoticed. Officer Hughes was there too, standing with a few other colleagues, chatting about the changes that had been happening around town. Hughes, who had remained cool and distant ever since Davis's appointment, locked eyes with the new chief as he approached. "What's he doing here so early?" Hughes muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Davis, unfazed by the remark, continued walking, his head held high. But for Hughes, this was more than just a shift in leadership. It was a personal affront. The tensions of the past few months had built up in his chest like a ticking time bomb, and with no other outlet for his frustrations, he snapped. As Davis passed by, Hughes sneered and, in a sudden burst of rage, spat at the ground in front of him. The action was deliberate, an aggressive move meant to demean and show his contempt for the new chief. It was a sign of defiance, a reminder that some things in this department hadn't changed. Davis halted in his tracks, pausing for a moment. The other officers fell silent, watching the unfolding drama. The tension in the air was palpable. Then, Davis turned slowly, his gaze steady and unflinching. "Is there a problem, Officer Hughes?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an undeniable authority. Hughes, stunned by the composed response, scoffed. "I don't think I need to explain myself to you." Davis, still unmoved, took a deep breath. "You just did," he said, his words cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "And I'll be sure to address this, when the time comes." Hughes' face flushed with embarrassment, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. His act of defiance had backfired. He had expected a confrontation, a show of weakness from Davis, but instead, he had been met with strength and control. At that moment, the reality of the situation began to sink in for Hughes. The new police chief wasn't some figurehead. Davis had worked his way up through the ranks, earned the respect of those who had been willing to give him a chance, and now stood as the head of the very department that had once been his adversary. Hughes had underestimated the depth of Davis's resolve, and the respect that came with his new role. The next few days were tense in the department. Hughes tried to avoid Davis, unable to look him in the eye after his outburst. The other officers, though they were quietly sympathetic to Davis, didn't know how to approach the situation. Whispers spread through the hallways, some in favor of the new chief, others critical. But it was clear that the power dynamics had shifted, and Hughes was on the wrong side of history. In the weeks that followed, Davis proved his worth as chief. He implemented new training programs, focused on community outreach, and worked tirelessly to reform policies that had long been outdated. His leadership, though met with resistance by some, began to show results. Crime rates dropped, relationships between the police and local residents began to heal, and the town slowly started to embrace the changes that had once seemed so foreign. As for Hughes, he had no choice but to adapt. He knew he could never undo the moment of disrespect he had shown his new chief, but he was determined to regain some of his dignity. Slowly, he began working with Davis, not as a subordinate, but as a colleague who had learned a hard lesson about pride and prejudice. And in the end, the town learned a valuable lesson too: change wasn't always easy, and it didn't come without growing pains. But when people chose to embrace it, even in the face of their own discomfort, something powerful could emerge, a community, stronger and more unified than before.